Ethan didn't sleep that night. Not because of the crash, not even because of Karen's targeting. It was the drone. It had hovered watching for nearly 30 seconds before darting away behind the houses like a startled insect. Ethan reviewed the footage from his motion-activated cameras, but the angle was bad, grainy. He only caught the tail end of it, way off toward Karen's side of the street. Coincidence? No. Karen was the one who controlled the HOA's surveillance policies. She'd lobbied for drone patrols last summer, under the guise of ensuring safety and compliance. Ethan had fought against it, even spoke at a board meeting. That's when she'd first labeled him as non-cooperative. And now what? Retaliation, using a disaster. At 3:27 a.m., he sent an email to his lawyer, just in case. By sunrise, the crash site was under federal jurisdiction. Yellow tape spanned the woods, guarded by bored local deputies. An unmarked SUV had parked outside the HOA clubhouse, and two unfamiliar men in suits walked the neighborhood like tourists with very serious faces. One of them paused in front of Ethan's driveway, studying something on a handheld device before moving on. Karen, on the other hand, had transformed into a public safety angel overnight. She walked house to house, holding a clipboard, asking safety check questions and pretending not to bring up Ethan's name, though somehow every conversation circled back to him. She lingered longest outside Mrs. Paxton's house, the one with the garden gnomes Ethan once complimented. Now even Mrs. Paxton didn't wave when he passed. At 10:12 a.m., two HOA board members knocked on his door. Randy and Colleen. Plastic smiles. Eyes jittery. Ethan, we're just here to follow up on the violation report, Randy said, tapping a folder that probably had nothing inside it. Karen mentioned you might be using non-standard radio equipment. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. My weather antenna. Been there 2 years. Registered within FCC specs. Colleen cleared her throat. There's concern that it could have interfered with the aircraft's systems. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That's a federal investigation now, isn't it? You two here? As HOA? Or something else? Silence. Colleen shifted uncomfortably, just documenting he didn't let them in. But he watched them walk straight to Karen's house. Afterward, her red door already open, her smug silhouette framed like she'd been waiting. Later that afternoon, someone filed an anonymous tip to the FAA, claiming Ethan had built an illegal signal amplifier. An inspector came by, polite but firm, asked to see the equipment. Ethan agreed on the condition that he record the visit. The inspector didn't mind. After 20 minutes he confirmed what Ethan already knew. Nothing illegal, nothing remotely powerful enough to interfere with avionics. Still. The man lingered. Strange thing, the inspector said, tapping the side of his folder. The plane's distress signal cut out completely. Mid-transmission, like it hit a wall of interference. Ethan frowned. From my backyard. The man hesitated. Honestly, the source was mobile. A cold chill crept up Ethan's spine. After the inspector left, he climbed up to his attic to check the roof. Rinkerin had accused him of making modifications. Everything was in place. But wedged behind the HVAC unit was a small, square piece of hardware he didn't recognize. Smooth, black, no markings. A device that didn't belong to him. He didn't touch it, just took a photo. Then he called the FAA. By nightfall, Karen had posted again, this time with a screenshot of a radar map and a red arrow pointing vaguely in his property's direction. Pattern confirmed. Interference, source likely. Community at risk. Below it, neighbors were commenting. So dangerous. Always knew he was weird. Why hasn't he been arrested yet? Ethan shut his laptop and locked every door. Someone had planted that device, and Karen had known where to point the finger before anyone else. The following morning, the sun rose on Evergreen Heights as if nothing had happened. Birds chirped. Sprinklers hissed. But beneath the Suburban.com, Ethan could feel the gears turning quiet, mechanical, and malicious. He stood at the edge of his lawn, coffee in hand, watching Karen Delaney hold court on her front porch like a suburban queen. Neighbors gathered around her, leaning in, nodding. Karen spoke with animated conviction, flipping pages on a clipboard while pointing once directly at Ethan's house. He didn't need to hear her words. The way the others glanced his way with narrowed eyes and half-hearted waves told him everything. Then came the knock. He opened the door to find a uniformed officer standing beside a clipboard-wielding man in khakis with a patch that read Evergreen Heights Compliance Unit. Mr. Calloway, the officer said, nodding. We've received several complaints about possible zoning violations and suspicious equipment on your property. Ethan blinked. Suspicious equipment. The clipboard man stepped forward. Unpermitted antenna. Karen Delaney submitted a formal concern. We're here to assess the property. Of course she had. Ethan led them through the backyard, his face blank, though inside his mind burned. The antenna was right where it had always been, neat, modest, barely reaching above the roofline. This has been up for 2 years, he said calmly. It's registered. Fully compliant. The officer shrugged, eyes scanning the yard. It's procedure. But the clipboard man took photos anyway of the antenna, of the wiring, of the exact area where the black device had been planted, now removed and hidden in Ethan's locked workshop. They left with polite nods, but not before handing him a bright orange citation notice. Violation? $500 fine. Pending board review. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the HOA board. A mandatory emergency meeting was scheduled for Friday night. Topic: community safety and responsible technology use. Ethan didn't need to guess who'd be leading. He spent the next 2 hours pulling security footage. The attic camera, thankfully, had caught something faint movement. A figure climbing into the crawl space at 3:14 a.m. the night of the crash. It wasn't clear enough to see a face, just a short figure, agile, wearing gloves and a hoodie. But that figure had definitely planted the device. He saved the footage to 3 separate flash drives and stashed them in different places in the house. Then, he emailed one to his lawyer with the subject line, insurance. Later that evening, the knock on the door was quieter. His neighbor Richard again. This time, he wasn't alone. With him was a younger woman, Lena. From across the street, she looked nervous but determined. She's doing it again, Lena said before Ethan could speak. Karen, she's calling people, privately, asking us to testify against you. She says she has proof that you interfered with the plane's GPS, but she's bluffing. Ethan stepped aside and let them in. Why come to me? Because it's a setup, Richard said. The same thing happened last year. Karen tried to force out a couple with a home studio. She claimed it disrupted emergency scanners. Took months to clear them. They moved away. She's weaponizing fear, Lena added, but this time it's bigger. A plane crash. She's escalating. Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. Let her, he said, because this time, I have something she doesn't expect. Outside, Karen's porch light blinked twice off, on, off again. A signal dot in the distance. Ethan heard the soft mechanical hum of a drone approaching from the east. Ethan sat in darkness, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of his laptop screen. The drone's hum had vanished moments ago, like it had done its job and returned to wherever it came from. He stared at the still frame on his monitor, a blurry shot of the black-clad figure crawling through his attic days before. Not clear enough for an ID, not admissible, but proof enough for him. He uploaded the footage to a cloud drive. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He reopened his private server logs, tucked deep within a vault of encrypted data. Back when Ethan worked in aerospace defense, he'd built systems designed to catch signals invisible to average. Radio bands jamming, spoofing, cloaking. The device found on his property had been subtle but amateur. He recognized the crude wiring, the frequency modulator. It was designed to mimic a proximity spike just enough to throw off navigation. Exactly what would confuse a light aircraft on a low pass, and exactly the kind of tech that would take someone like Karen months to get her hands on unless she had help. He pulled up local amateur radio frequencies and began running diagnostics. If someone else in Evergreen Heights had broadcast a jamming pulse, there'd be a shadow, something faint but traceable. Ethan just needed to know where to look. At 2:04 a.m. His screen blinked. Signal interruption logged origin. Grid point 14B. Magnolia Lane Current Street. Ethan sat back slowly. She hadn't just accused him. She'd staged the entire thing, but the why was still out of reach. What did she gain by crashing a plane and pointing the finger at a quiet guy with weather antennas? The answer didn't come until Friday night. The emergency HOA meeting took place in the community clubhouse, an elegant but sterile building with perfectly trimmed hedges and a suspicious number of flags. The room was full, every seat occupied. People stood in the back. Karen stood at the front, smiling tightly in a crimson blazer. Thank you all for coming, she began, microphone in hand. After the tragic incident involving the aircraft, the board believes it's time to discuss responsible technology usage and protect our community from unnecessary risks. Her eyes landed on Ethan like a knife drawn slow. There is reason to believe a private signal may have contributed to the crash. Gasps rippled. A few turned and stared directly at Ethan. He didn't flinch, Karen continued. We've contacted relevant authorities, but the board is empowered to act now to ensure public safety. We propose a new resolution banning all unapproved signal-emitting devices within Evergreen Heights. She flipped a page, and issuing penalties to residents under investigation. The microphone screeched briefly. Randy, seated beside her, winced. Colleen tapped a folder undoubtedly with Ethan's name on it. Ethan raised his hand. Karen paused. Mr. Calloway. He stood, calm, calculated. I have a few concerns. First, why did your drone hover over my house 2 nights in a row? Murmurs. Karen blinked. I'm not aware of any drone. I traced its serial broadcast. HOA surveillance model, registered to your address. A hush fell. I also found a black interference device planted in my attic, and I have footage. A figure sneaking in. Before the crash, I've submitted it to the FAA. They're very interested in Evergreen Heights. Karen's smile faltered. And for what it's worth, Ethan added, that crash, the FAA investigator says it involved GPS spoofing from a mobile jammer. I ran a spectrum analysis. The pulse came from Magnolia Lane. Same time as the crash, I live on Crestline. Karen's knuckles whitened around the podium. I didn't plant anything, she snapped. This is slander. Then you'll be fine, Ethan said, because the feds are on their way. I told them about you. He sat down, and the room exploded in whispers. Karen's eyes darted to the door just as a man in a dark suit stepped inside, scanning the room with a federal badge hanging from his belt. Karen's confidence crumbled. The moment the man in the suit crossed the threshold, the hum of casual whispers around the clubhouse ceased like someone had hit mute. Even the HOA board members stopped fidgeting. The man didn't flash his badge or raise his voice. He didn't have to. The air around him shifted the room. He walked to the front with measured precision, pulling a single page from his inner coat pocket and sliding it onto the table beside Karen's binder. I'm Special Investigator Daniel Ruiz, he said, voice low but clear. Federal Aviation Administration. I need to speak with HOA President Karen Delaney. Now. Karen's lips parted, but nothing came out. Colleen stood abruptly. Shouldn't this be ... in private? Ruiz didn't blink. It will be. But I suggest the board reschedule this meeting. This qualifies as a material investigation. Karen tried to maintain composure. I'll cooperate, of course. I'm just as concerned about this plane crash as everyone else. Ruiz nodded, without warmth. Good. Let's start with your personal drone usage and signal activity logs from the last 72 hours. Karen went pale. The meeting adjourned in scattered confusion. People stood muttering, casting wary glances at Ethan as they filtered out. Some looked apologetic, others looked afraid. No one looked smug anymore. Back at home, Ethan closed and locked his workshop. He sat at his desk, staring at the folder Ruiz had handed him after the meeting ended. Ruiz hadn't come unprepared. Inside the folder were grainy satellite images, flight data, a transcript from air traffic control. But one page stood out. Short list of names and addresses. HOA presidents, 5 of them. Different states, different neighborhoods, all connected by one common fact. Their communities had suffered aircraft-related incidents in the past 3 years, and Karen Delaney's name was on the list. Ethan leaned back, stunned. She's done this before. He grabbed his laptop, pulled open browser tabs, and started researching each name. One in Georgia, one in Colorado, another in Florida. They'd all used vague accusations against homeowners after similar crashes and complaints, illegal antennas, supposed interference. Lawsuits were filed, property values plummeted. In each case, the HOA somehow gained more control over neighborhood infrastructure surveillance budgets, signal monitoring, and even new development permits. Ethan checked Karen's campaign from last summer. She had tried to push for gated access and private security contracts. It had failed until now. But what if causing a crisis was her shortcut to power? A ping from his email stopped him cold. Subject: confidential, HOA board communication. Urgent from anonymous at protonmail.com. Inside was a message, short and chilling. She doesn't work alone. Look into Signagrid Corp. Follow the money. Attached was a spreadsheet showing HOA disbursements. Karen had quietly funneled funds masked as infrastructure review and tech upgrades into a shell account linked to a consulting firm based in DC, the firm's parent company, Signalgrid Corp, a low-profile defense contractor specializing in communications, jamming, and signal redirection. Ethan's heart pounded. He cross-checked the timeline. A $12,000 deposit made weeks before the crash. The equipment he'd found in his attic, built with components found in a signal grid jammer prototype from 10 years ago when Ethan had still worked for a firm under contract with them. It wasn't just HOA politics anymore. This was something else. Something strategic. Ethan printed everything he knew. This wouldn't end with Karen's arrest or her resignation. He packed the documents into a locked case and headed out into the night, toward the one place Karen didn't control, the FAA field office downtown. What he didn't know, as he locked his front door, was that across the street, a figure stood in the shadows, phone pressed to their ear. He's moving. He found the accounts. A pause, then. Yes, I'll handle it. The FAA field office sat buried between 2 office parks off the interstate. Faceless and gray, exactly the kind of building no one would ever glance at twice. Ethan parked in the back, clutching the locked document case like a lifeline. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he walked through a hallway lined with faded aviation posters and stiff-looking agents. Behind glass partitions. Special Investigator Daniel Ruiz met him without fanfare. He looked tired but sharper than ever, like someone who'd finally spotted a crack in a wall he'd been hammering for months. You found something, Ruiz said, motioning Ethan into a secure interview room. Ethan opened the case. Signalgrid Corp. Karen's HOA paid them through a shell firm, disguised as tech upgrades, weeks before the crash. Ruiz sifted through the papers quickly, his eyes scanning each line. Halfway through, he stopped and exhaled slowly. Signalgrid, muttered. I've been tracking that name for almost a year. They build high-frequency jammers, specialized, military-grade, and Karen bought one, Ethan said. Or someone she's working with did. Ruiz nodded, visibly disturbed. We've seen this in 3 other cities' community crashes. Weird interference reports, local HOA figures quietly backing privatized surveillance or property takeovers. But you, he tapped the photos Ethan provided, you're the first one to actually find a device before they cleared it out. Ethan leaned forward. What do they gain from all this? Ruiz glanced at the mirrored wall behind them before answering. Airspace rerouting contracts, insurance settlements, emergency infrastructure grants. If an HOA appears vulnerable, developers move in, property gets bought up, control shifts. Ethan's gut twisted. They're crashing planes to make neighborhoods vulnerable. Small planes, drones, controlled incidents. But yes, Ruiz's face hardened. Evergreen Heights is just the latest. Ruiz stood and locked the folder in a metal drawer. I'm authorizing a formal search warrant. We'll need her HOA office, digital records, personal accounts. You need to stay low. Ethan's jaw tightened. That won't be easy. I think someone followed me here. Ruiz stopped mid-step. What did they look like? I didn't get a good look, but they knew I had the docs. They were watching my house last night. Ruiz grabbed a radio. We're assigning you protection. Stay off the grid. Don't go home. By the time Ethan left the FAA office, black sedans were already headed toward Evergreen Heights. Back at the neighborhood clubhouse, Karen was in the middle of a private meeting with 2 board members when the feds arrived. The knock was firm. The voice was cold. Federal agents. Open the door. Karen moved slowly. Too slowly. She reached for her phone only for it to be plucked from her hand by Ruiz himself when the door finally opened. This is illegal, she snapped. I demand to speak with my lawyer. Ruiz didn't flinch. You'll get that chance after we go through your emails. They moved fast, securing hard drives, scanning the HOA server, pulling paper files. But it was what they found in a false drawer of Karen's desk that turned the whole investigation sideways. 2 burner phones. One with encrypted texts referencing signal relay installs, M-field timing, and worst of all, in short, the Callaway property receives final blame. Use HOA incident reports if needed. Ruiz stared at the screen for a long moment before nodding to his agents. Take her in. Karen didn't resist. But as they walked her past her front door, she looked across the street at Ethan's empty house. She smiled. The kind of smile that meant she'd already planned for this. Karen Delaney sat inside a gray-walled interrogation room with her blazer removed and her composure strained but intact. She said, little answered questions, with clipped deflections, legal phrasing, and blank expressions. No tears, no yelling. She wasn't rattled. Not truly. And that made Ruiz uneasy. Ethan sat on the other side of the one-way mirror, arms crossed, watching her like someone studying a venomous insect. He wasn't looking for guilt. He already knew she was guilty. He was watching for arrogance. He saw it in her eyes. She knows she's not the end of it, Ethan muttered. Ruiz, standing beside him, nodded. She's the face, not the architect. Karen refused to unlock her phones, but the forensic team didn't need her cooperation. The encrypted texts were enough to open a wider probe signal grid's connection to HOA board members. The untraceable payments through private foundations, even contractor records showing short-term hires of tech consultants in nearby towns. But the real breakthrough came 2 nights later. Ruiz called Ethan. At 1:11 a.m. we found something. Ethan drove to the FAA satellite field office, this time escorted by 2 plainclothes agents. Ruiz met him in the hallway, face drawn with fatigue, but holding a hard drive like it was the Rosetta Stone. In Karen's attic, hidden under insulation, nestled in a hollowed beam. He plugged it in and pulled up a screen full of time-stamped footage. Lower surveillance from multiple angles inside Evergreen Heights. Not just Karen's home, multiple properties, including Ethan's single quotes S.1 feed, showed his backyard from high above. Another pointed directly at his workshop window. Another at his attic door. They were watching me the whole time, Ethan whispered. Ruiz scrolled to a folder labeled RF testing. Inside were test logs, times and dates, and short video clips of handheld signal jammers being calibrated. Some footage even showed a man Ethan didn't recognize adjusting equipment under the cover of night. The most damning clip? Someone in a signal grid hoodie entering Ethan's garage 3 nights before the crash. Not Karen, Ruiz said. One of their techs. Karen gave him access. She's not just complicit, she facilitated it. The plan had been precise. Plant the device. Feed rumors through Karen, then allow a crash to shift suspicion toward a pre-selected scapegoat. Ethan was targeted not randomly, but because he had the kind of setup that could plausibly be blamed. Ruiz closed the laptop. We're preparing warrants now. Full federal investigation. Karen won't walk from this. But Ethan's relief didn't last long. The next morning, news broke. Karen had been transported to a secure location for witness negotiation only to vanish en route. FBI agents confirmed the transport vehicle had been intercepted. 2 fake agents, matching real credentials, professional, clean. Karen was gone without a trace. Ruiz looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days when he called Ethan again. She's not the target anymore, he said. She's the liability, which means, Ethan said slowly, whoever's behind this doesn't want her talking. Ruiz sighed. Exactly. But Shamidov left us something. We're still combing her personal accounts. Ethan hung up and walked through his home, locking doors, checking windows, resetting the firewall on every connected device. The enemy wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the machine behind Hertha contractors, the funding, the people who cleaned up messes like her when they became inconvenient. That night, a package appeared at Ethan's front step. No sender, no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. If you're reading this, they're already watching. Ethan stared at the drive in silence. Then, without hesitation, he plugged it in. The file on the USB drive was a single video 23 minutes long. Grainy, with a flickering overhead light casting jagged shadows across the frame. Karen sat alone at what looked like her kitchen table, a wine glass full but untouched. At her elbow, no makeup, no blazer, just a plain gray sweatshirt, and eyes that darted constantly to something just out of frame. "This is insurance," she began. Her voice was thinner than usual, less polished, more human. "If this ends up in the wrong hands, I'll be discredited. I know that. But if you're watching this, I've either disappeared, or I'm about to." She leaned forward. "I didn't crash that plane." Ethan paused the video, but only for a moment. His pulse was already racing. Kieran continued, "I was approached by a man last year, said he worked for a consulting firm that specialized in civil infrastructure resilience. Sounded like a grant organization. He knew everything our HOA budgets, our weaknesses, the last 5 times we failed compliance reports. He said Evergreen Heights was vulnerable, said they could help." Her voice cracked slightly. "They offered us new surveillance tech, private monitoring grants, pilot programs, they called them. I didn't realize what kind of pilot they meant. I thought it was about cameras, sensors, low-level stuff. Then came the hardware, and the operators. They moved like military, but they weren't." Ethan watched her eyes shift toward the unseen camera operator. "They wanted access to rooftops. They said it was for weather modeling, radio propagation, tests. When I asked questions, they told me to focus on compliance, and I did." Karen looked down. Her fingers tapped the table anxiously. The device they planted on Callaway's roof was supposed to trigger a minimal interference event. Not a crash, not that. When I found out someone had died, I told them I wanted out. She went quiet for a full minute. They said, I was part of it now, that if I left, I'd take the fall. So I followed orders. I faked the complaint reports. I pressured the board. I even wrote the anonymous tip myself. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Karen leaned in close. But they're sloppy now. They didn't know I recorded them. There's a backup server, signal grids, testing logs, flight path disruptions. They're trying to destabilize neighborhoods to justify defense contracts. Real estate buys, tech installs. It's all connected. She glanced to the side again. This time, fear was unmistakable. If you're watching this, find the server. I hid the location in the old HOA files. Look for Ordinance E37. That's where I buried the metadata. The screen went black. Ethan sat in silence for several minutes. By the time he called Ruiz, it was nearly midnight. The investigator answered on the second ring. I have something, Ethan said. Karen recorded a full confession. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Ruiz and a federal IT team were inside the Evergreen Heights HOA server room. Most of the files had already been scrubbed, but the Ordinance E37 file, misnamed, buried under sprinkler flow regulations, contained an encrypted folder. Inside it were terabytes of grids, testing data, real-time jammer locations, crash rehearsal simulations, and internal communications revealing they had operations active in at least 6 other neighborhoods. By noon, Ethan's name had been officially cleared in the FAA's investigation. By 3 p.m., federal agents raided Signal Grid's Virginia headquarters. And by sundown, to Evergreen Heights board members, Randy and Colleen had disappeared without a trace. The first sign something was wrong came when Ethan noticed the silence. It was the day after the Signal Grid raid. Evergreen Heights, once bustling with patrols, nosy neighbors, and clattering garden tools, was suddenly still eerily so. No leaf blowers, no dog walkers, not even Karen's infernal wind chimes from across the street. Then came the second sign. A black SUV idling at the far end of the cul-de-sac. Same model the feds used, but the license plate was unfamiliar. Ethan didn't trust it. He locked his front door and moved quickly to the back office. The USB Karen had left him. He'd copied the footage twice, once to a secure cloud and once to a physical drive, stored off-site. But there was one last piece he hadn't decrypted yet. A compressed folder buried in the Ordinance E37 files. Ruiz had warned him, if that folder's what we think it is, don't open it unless you have to. Today, Ethan had to. He bypassed the checksum and watched the encryption fall away. A single document blinked open. Project Cradle Point, Urban Reclamation via Engineered Crisis. It read like a think tank report, but the truth dripped off. Every paragraph like venom. Signal Grid had been running simulations for years, orchestrating engineered tech crises in suburban areas to artificially lower property values. Once a neighborhood was deemed unstable after an incident like a drone scare, a crash, or a rogue signal, predatory investment firms moved in. The tech used was ex-military, downgraded just enough to be non-lethal but effective in mimicking chaos. Every HOA they infiltrated was a puppet. Karen was just one of dozens of noise outside, snapped Ethan from the screen. Someone was at his front door, not knocking, picking the lock. He pulled the hard drive from his tower and backed toward the hallway. The sliding door to the backyard was open just enough to slip through. He ran not to the street, not to his car. He headed into the woods behind Evergreen Heights, where the plane had crashed. He ducked into the gully that still smelled faintly of jet fuel and hid among the shrubs, heart thundering. From a distance, he heard the door to his home creak open, footsteps.com, purposeful, and then a voice. Mr. Calloway. You shouldn't have kept digging. It wasn't Ruiz. It wasn't anyone from the HOA. It was someone else. Corporate. Cold. Cold. Ethan reached into his jacket, pulled out a pocket modem, and flipped the switch. A small green light blinked to life. Within seconds, a GPS ping shot out to the FAA field office. Ruiz would get it. 10 minutes passed. The footsteps grew fainter. Then sirens. Red and blue lights tore through the trees. Tactical boots hit the ground. Shouts filled the woods. Ethan stepped out, holding the hard drive in both hands. I have it, he said. 3 weeks later, Signal Grid's board of directors were subpoenaed. The Project Cradle Point was splashed across every major news network. Investors fled. Assets froze. 6 satellite contractors were indicted. Evergreen Heights was placed under federal oversight. Ruiz offered Ethan a job data analyst. Oversight task force. He declined. Instead, Ethan rebuilt the antenna on his roof, not for weather reports. This time, it scanned for rogue frequencies. He installed new locks, cameras with hidden backups, and every so often, when a car he didn't recognize circled the neighborhood too slowly, he took a photo. Karen's body was never found. But rumors spread a woman matching her description seen boarding a cargo ship in Baltimore under a different name. Ethan didn't care. She was a shadow. Now, but he wasn't afraid of the dark anymore, because if they ever came back, he'd be ready.